Well, this morning, obviously, we're taking in the decision. It's a 275-page decision. Broadly, my perspective is it reinforced the importance of the government being engaged. We know that to get this project done, and the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline is important for us to diversify our markets, to get international market access for our resources, that we need to be able to deal with the risks. So as I saw what happened this morning, I know we have more work to do to figure it out, but I also recognize that that's exactly the reason we decided to purchase Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion.
The government did seem fairly confident ahead of this decision. How much did you anticipate this as a possible outcome, though?
I think we always knew that there would be steps in this project where there would be times we'd have to look at how things were done and make sure that we address it properly going forward. And the process that was put in place by the previous government through the NEB process is one that we have to take a look at and make sure that we have the right approach going forward.
I don't have to tell you that the market has reacted to this news, that energy stocks, for example, have been under some pressure, people trying to figure out what happens next. Whether it's something like an appeal, whether it's on the legislative front, can you give us a sense of what the federal government's next steps will be?
As I said, it's a 275-page document. We're looking at it carefully to assess next steps. It did say that the courts asked us to get back promptly. And that's, in fact, exactly what we will look to do. Big picture, I think what we've seen here is that we need to have a robust process. That's something that we've taken to heart. We've clearly worked towards making sure that we've dealt with environmental concerns with our Oceans Protection Plan, which puts in place a way to ensure that environmental issues have been dealt with. We want to make sure this project gets done. We want to make sure that it happens, and as a government, we're well placed to assure that that happens. We'll be moving forward with resolve.
You believe this project will be built?
This project will be built. It needs to go through a process to ensure that we consult appropriately and engage appropriately as identified by the court this morning. It needs to ensure that we meet up to the highest environmental standards. Those are commitments our government's made at every step along the way. But make no mistake, I mean, if there isn't a day when Canadians understand the importance of trade diversification, today is that day. As we talk about NAFTA, we know that we need to be able to have the ability to get to market our resources. When 99% of our resources go to the U.S. market, we need to reflect on that and say getting to international markets is critically important. That's what we're going to do through this project.
Has this changed the timeline, though, to getting something done, to getting something built?
I think it's early for me to get to conclusions. Again, the court's asked us to get back to the discussion promptly. We will. Our resolve is absolutely intact. We're going to continue to move forward, and we'll do that in a way that respects the decision that came this morning.
This decision coming on the same day that Kinder Morgan Canada had a shareholder vote on the sale of Trans Mountain to the federal government, and through this process, you've talked about eventually having an outcome, whether some kind of sale down the road. How does the timing on that change as a result of everything today?
Well, that was a positive step this morning. The Kinder Morgan vote was as expected, but positive. It allows us to move forward to close the transaction, which will happen in the coming days. That means that we'll be able to de-risk the project, as we said we were going to do, to ensure it gets done. Part of the de-risking is making sure that we have an agreement across the country, that it's the right thing for the country. That's the discussion this morning, is just ensuring that we get to that conclusion.
But surely it would have been a less risky situation for a possible end buyer of this if we had seen a different court outcome today. For anyone who's watching this and wondering if they want to talk to the federal government about buying this down the road.
Our view that this project is going to be owned eventually by the private sector is, again, still intact. We see that as the right outcome over time. We recognize that the government's in the best position to de-risk the project. Today's decision demonstrates that pretty clearly. The approach going forward will be to consider this decision, move forward in a way that respects it and gets us to the outcome we want, which is to get our resources to market. And at that stage, of course, it becomes a very viable commercial project for us to sell to a commercial buyer. So for all those people looking at whether the government made a decision that was the right decision, I think today's court decision demonstrates we did. As a government, we can de-risk this project, make sure that we meet our objectives, and eventually get it back into the private sector.
It has, though, raised this issue again around competitiveness in this country. You talk a lot about it. I know you're generally optimistic on that subject, but as we've listened to some of our guests today, they might have a background in the world of politics. Could be Brad Wall, could be Jean Charest, who we've spoken to today, people from the energy sector, like Gwyn Morgan, or from the world of Bay Street, David Rosenberg, a well-known economist. All of them have cited that concern about how competitive we are as a nation with examples like this. How do you address those concerns?
Always need to consider the frame. We have an economy that's doing very well right now. So I think what all of those individuals you mentioned would agree is that we saw very positive growth in 2017. We had numbers out this morning talking about how well the economy is doing this year. We obviously have a very positive situation for middle-class Canadians with unemployment rate at really the lowest we've seen in 40 years. So our economy is doing well. The question is, how do we ensure it continues to do well? I've been out listening to Canadian business people, to Canadians, to think about what are the steps that the government can take to continue the positive trajectory that we're on. And I'm getting really good feedback in terms of how we can address trade diversification, how we can think about dealing with our tax system to ensure that it remains strong for people to continue to make investments in Canada so that we can have a robust economy for the future. So I'm hearing great ideas, but I'm always taking it in the context that we found ourselves in a much better position than we were a couple of years ago. Anxiety about the future is always going to be there. Trade anxiety on a day like today is obviously something that we see, but that's again coming back to the discussion around Trans Mountain. It is about trade diversification. It is about getting our resources to international markets. So there's a confluence of things that are making people feel anxious. My job is always to have the frame of how well the economy is doing.
And yet, to have those two stories that people are anxious about, trade uncertainty and pipeline uncertainty, essentially folding on the same day, at the very least in the same week. Is there a word that would describe, from your position, how this week has unfolded?
Well, it's a busy week, as you can imagine. I think what we have to do is look at those two issues and plow ahead in the way that makes most sense on each one of them. On NAFTA, we are in an intense period of negotiation. I can't really go into all the details, obviously, of those negotiations, but I think you've heard from the Prime Minister, you've heard from my colleague, Chrystia Freeland, a sense of cautious optimism that we may be able to get to a conclusion. There's more work to be done in that regard. On Trans Mountain, we're going to get this project done. We're going to do it in a way that considers the need for consultation that's robust with Indigenous Canadians, that ensures that we've dealt with environmental concerns. Canadians, though, expect us to find a way to get world prices for our resources. We're clearly not getting them by having all the resources go to the United States, so going to international markets is going to be critical. We're going to be here as long as it takes to make sure the project gets done in a way that allows it then to be moved into the private sector.